And here we are. So this is the second official, well, not even official, second actual podcast episode from The Flint. And I'm Neil Romanek, the editor of The Flint. And also we have Neil Howman, publisher of The Flint. And our first guest, I'm very excited, our first official guest, because if you saw the last or listened to the last podcast, it was just Neil. It was just the two Neils having a chat. So hopefully we've got something more interesting this time around. Well, I know we do. We have Tilly Ashton with us are you in Cardiff? Where are you?
I'm in Cardiff, in Southeast Wales.
Yes. So you're going to tell us about your role as a sustainability coordinator. Is that your official title?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a new role that it's a kind of self-invented title, I guess. But yes, I'm production sustainability advisor, currently working full-time for Seven Screen, which is an independent production company located in Cardiff, but they make both film and TV all over Wales. Most recently, Steeltown Murders up there for the BBC.
Nice.
And we also did a big Netflix movie a couple of years ago called Havoc with Tom Hardy and Forrest Whitaker. So that was a really big movie for an independent company in Wales to be taking on. And we had a Welsh director, Gareth Evans of The Raid fame, and he was very, very committed to making Havoc in Wales. So that was why we made it here. It was brilliant, great experience for me. And so since then, I guess the role is more gradually becoming more recognised. So as well as working for Seven Screen, I also teach for BAFTA, Albert. I teach their sustainable production courses, which is great because I'm able to share the work I'm doing on the grounds directly with other producers and commissioners and other crew members all around the country and often internationally through that teaching as well. So it's very much a case of getting the word out and getting people to start thinking differently about how they make content.
That's great. And we're talking about Wales sort of not accidentally. We saw you speak on a panel at the BAFTA Alberts Screen New Deal. Was it? I don't forget the official title. No, it was. It was about the Screen New Deal. That's right. And it was their summit. That's right. The BAFTA Albert Production Summit.
The Sustainable Production Summit.
Sustainable, not just any, but of course, the sustainable production. It would be, wouldn't it? And BAFTA Albert, as I've said in the last one, I worked for Albert for the first 6 months of this year, and Albert is the kind of the main sustainability organization for film and TV in the UK, and they had their production summit in Wales very specifically to launch the Screen New Deal report, right, for Wales. And so there's a whole Wales is being used in some ways, it seemed like, as a whole model for how to do sustainability in the larger industry. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I believe we were selected as a region through quite a competitive bidding process to be the first region to host, they call them a transformation plan. So the project is based on the Screen New Deal report that was originally published back in 2020 by BAFTA and BFI. And so the vision of that report is very much a kind of a blueprint of a future, much more sustainable production industry for the UK. And the reason Wales was chosen to host the very first pilot for the transformation plan was because we have really good connections between production companies, industry stakeholders such as Creative Wales, Film Cymru, Media Cymru, and also suppliers. We've got a really good network of green suppliers. And so Albert saw this as a really good location to base. We've also got the highest concentration of studios outside of London. So we've got one up in the north, ARIA, and then quite a cluster in the south as well. So that was why we were chosen. And the idea of it being over a 2-year period to gather all of the carbon footprint data from productions made in Wales, and also to work a series of workshops and interviews with everybody, all the stakeholders, production companies, crew, suppliers, to really interrogate our working practices and try and figure out the stumbling blocks so that what we've got now with the report that's just been launched last month is a very clear timeline for where we're heading in Wales, bespoke to our region, with clear targets that as a collective we need to be working towards.
And that's really seems very new to me. Has that been done anywhere else that you know of for an industry or for a thing?
No, I mean, not to my knowledge. And this is why it's really exciting, not just being in the UK, where we are really trailblazing a lot of this work, but also in Wales. I'm, really proud to be Welsh and live in Wales, even though I don't sound Welsh. So I'm really, it's one of the reasons I choose to stay here, rather than work elsewhere, because I feel that as a region, we're really good at pulling together to try and figure out solutions for this work. We may be small, but we're quite heavy hitting in the way that we like to do things. That's not to say there's not enormous challenges ahead. Perhaps an obvious one being transport, of course. And again, we're a really rural country. So there's a huge chunk of sort of mountains and beautiful countryside in the middle, which when you're looking at things like electric vehicle charging infrastructure, for example, can be a real challenge. And also, we're not like in the middle of London with great public transport networks. So again, you've got this challenge of how to move crew around and how to try and do so in a less environmentally impactful way.
Yeah. I was actually curious about how you've just explained how it came that there's a great sort of concentration of this sort of study and exercise in Wales. I presume it's because also it's quite a tight-knit community, relatively small. You mentioned about all the connections of studios and everything tying in nicely, but was part of the decision making that this would be somewhat contained and therefore easier to monitor with data, and it seems an ideal sort of region for this. Do you know who were you up against others in the decision making, and Wales was chosen because of that? What?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't privy to those discussions. But it's my understanding that there were some excellent bids from lots of other regions in the UK. And that's why I wouldn't, I'm not one to say we're doing it the only and the best way in Wales. We're just doing it one way. Also informed by Welsh Government policy, which is also quite a significant factor in terms of Welsh Government climate goals. But many other regions of the UK are also, they put together very good bids as well, and they're also doing some really excellent work. We are as a nation working hard, working together, led of course by the work going on at BAFTA Albert. But in terms of this particular pilot, we were really fortunate to get chosen and embraced it, wholeheartedly. But I say, as always, we're still a relatively new field within the industry. There's me and a couple of others who I've sort of trained up to do this work in Wales, but really we need whole well-trained sustainability teams on the ground, on production. And I think coming out of the Wales Green New Deal report is an understanding of the value of this work and, understanding the business case for sustainability, really. I think any business or industry to survive and thrive in a very uncertain future as we face all of these challenges of the climate emergency, we need to have sustainability and environmental social governance absolutely front and center in our planning.
So how did you get started doing this? Because I guess that's the question, is like we need to get a lot of people trained up really fast, and it seems like so far it's people just showing up and going, oh, I'll do that job, I guess. Nobody else seems to be doing it. How did you actually start, I guess, doing the job you have now, or was it even a job when you started?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, yes, it was. And it is done in different ways by different people all over, not just in the UK, there's other countries as well, particularly across Europe, where this work is really becoming much more embedded. Certainly in the last 2 years, I've seen big changes. But for me, I've always been quite a greenie, I guess you would call it. So from when I was a kid, and when I was a student, I was back in the 90s, I was busy setting up recycling at my university in the UK and my university in Australia when I had a year there. So I've always kind of trailblazed, this isn't working, we can do this better. How can we find solutions? I'm very much a kind of figure out the problem, find a solution kind of person. So, and then I took a career break for 15 years actually and raised 4 children. So, of course, I'm now informed by the idea of what kind of planet they're going to inherit. And I've just had my first grandchild as well 6 weeks ago. So very
congratulations.
much. Thank you. Very much aware that, I won't be here for that many decades longer, but they will. And so, again, this is what energizes me to try and find ways where I can be effective in whatever I'm doing, but with these broader climate goals in mind. So since then, when I went back to work, I've done everything from journalism to campaign management, and always within the field of sustainability. And then I found my way into production through a friend who needed someone with environmental experience to come on board on a big Paramount Pictures job in London, big American a big budget movie. So that was the first time I stepped into this world and was confronted just initially by the scale, both of the incredible, intricate, extraordinary sets, and also consequently the waste resulting from that. So I, at that time I was an environmental assistant. There wasn't a huge amount of influence that I could have, but I still put great recycling systems in place. We started being much more efficient and effective about the way we separated our waste. And we also started to donate into the community on that job. And then COVID happened at some point after that, and I came back to Wales. And then after a brief hiatus where everybody locked down, we then went back into production. And I was fortunate to get the opportunity through Netflix to join Havoc, which 7 Screen and XYZ Films made in Wales that I mentioned earlier. So it was Netflix, really, the vision of Netflix, who put sustainability coordinators now on all of their major productions. So they funded my role on that, and they also enabled me to come in really early on in pre-production, weeks before we started shooting. And that is really key. If you want to be effective, you need to have that forward planning time, both to get your crew engaged with different ways of working, but also to reach out and connect with people along the supply chain who can help you find solutions. And also just to get all your systems in place for mapping the carbon footprint of a huge feature film, which is epic in terms of data. So yeah, I mean, in terms of Albert certification, do you want me just to quickly run you through what that entails? Would that be of interest?
Sure. Yeah, actually, because it sounds like, people, the sort of cliche of the greenie is like, oh, you've got your head in the clouds and it's all very groovy, but it all sounds intensely practical. Like the whole thing is like very, very practical.
Just before we go into that later, I just had one question about the Havoc. I keep thinking there you were creating havoc or wreaking havoc. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Well, that's what we loved. We loved that juxtaposition between making a fast-paced action movie, crazy stunts and all the rest of it, but making it in a way that was respectful of the planet.
Yes. So the question was, this was so recent, was how responsive were the crew, the actors, everybody you kind of engage with, because it's very new, as we said, somebody there, and you walked up to, say, one of the casts and said, I'm the sustainability coordinator consultant, and, were you met with an understanding or bewilderment or?
Yeah, it's tricky with cast because there's a real diplomacy involved. So you don't often get the face-to-face conversations, but in the case of Tom Hardy, he and his wife run a company called Wonderworks that provides free childcare to people in the industry. Yeah. So they're based usually at Leavesden Studios, but we were fortunate on Havoc in that we were able to use their mobile childcare bus. And so we were able to provide free childcare to all of our cast and crew during the shoots. So I got to know Charlotte Riley, who runs Tom's wife, that runs Wonderworks.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they do is they use a lot of spare set build materials and props and costumes and things as learning experiences for the children in their care. So I had quite a lot to do with her through that connection of finding what we could donate from set and that they could use. And also I oversaw all of their recycling as well from the nursery as well as from the rest of the studio. But we also recycled all of our food waste. So we made sure that Cast had places that they could recycle food and so on, as well as other recycling streams. But also with that in mind, there's still this whole thing of everyone chucking everything in a bin, which can still happen when everyone's very busy. So we also had a system in place whereby that waste would get resorted and separated into single streams for recycling. But as far as crew engagement, absolutely fundamental to my work. I'm one person. I can't do this single-handed. So what I have to do is basically try and win hearts and minds.
Yes.
And I do that through an understanding of the hierarchy of the production pyramid. And I'm respectful of that, but I'm also all about empowering conversation and communication, both top down and bottom up. So when I talk about communication loops, I mean, also benefiting from our crew and from our suppliers in them helping us problem solve with these challenges, and then feeding a lot of those solutions and ideas back up through the production pyramid. But also on the other side of that coin, it's about celebrating our small wins. So I do a lot around creating posters. There's one here, just to give you an example. That's one of our food waste posters, which just... I can read the data.
What does it say? What is it?
Yeah, I'll read it to you. So it gives you, using BAFTA Albert data on meal choices. So this is based on per 10 meals. Yeah. If you have 10 vegan meals, you're going to generate 5.2 kilograms of carbon emissions. For vegetarian, per 10 meals, you're looking at 7.6 kilograms. And for meat, the average of all meats aggregated, you're looking at 47 kilograms. So we stick these posters around, and we rather than browbeating crew to all go vegan, we just show them what they can achieve by making a few plant-based switches. So, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just saying, once you see that number, like you're going up the list, and you go, I'll bet it's going to be like 20 or something, and then you see 40, and you're like, well, yeah, what are we doing? Just that number itself gives you a little bit of pause.
Absolutely, and beef is even higher. Beef is by far the highest emitting of the meats. So again, it just gets conversations going. We had one crew member on Havoc actually say they knew they were on the right job when they saw those meal posters dotted around the site.
That's really good.
Yeah. But we also feedback about our recycling rates. So, for example, on the production I've just finished, which was for a different production company, I sort of got loaned out to them for this summer, making an ITV drama series. And
are you working primarily for Severn? Is that your Severn is your employer? Okay.
Yeah, but I can consult on other productions on their behalf. So so I just finished working with an ITV drama series that was filming in South Wales. And again, with their crew, we were achieving such great recycling rates. We were up around the sort of 80% recycled of all of our set and unit-based waste. And so we would share those statistics with our crew. And then again, that has the knock-on effect of making them more engaged with recycling and being better at using the right bin, and all that. So it's these little quick, easy wins that give everyone a bit of a feel-good factor. And also we do a lot of community donations. So we donate meals through our caterers who have all the right permits. We donate to rough sleeper shelters in the area. We also donate to food banks, or depending on where we're filming, we just connect with local food banks and donate. But also in terms of clothing, so we've taken clothing to Women's Aid shelters. We've taken it to homeless shelters. I've got a big load of blankets in my car today that I'm taking later on to a hostel in Swansea that works with rough sleepers. So. And again, with things that can be used by schools and colleges, things like metal, wood offcuts, we've donated those to design and technology students and welding students in the area. And again, big pieces of set we've donated in the past, including some beautiful trees, artificial trees that were made out of carved polystyrene and looked exactly like beech trees. We donated them to a theatre school in Swansea and some to the Millennium Centre in Cardiff. So it's about breaking the old model of finishing filming, smashing everything up and throwing it in a skip. We need to stop that. And the reason for that is because as a planet, we face rapidly diminishing natural resources through the threats to our ecosystems. We are also massively over-consuming globally. So in the UK, we're currently consuming 3 planets worth of our share of global resources. So just in the UK, we need to reduce consumption by 2/3. So the way that we do that is by critiquing what we do with those materials. So where and how we source them from, making sure they're ethically, locally sourced, and making sure we keep those resources in use for as long as possible. But there's also cost-effective knock-ons there. So we're not wasting materials. We're reusing a lot of materials. We're directing resources into the local community, which of course also has an economic impact there.
Does it change the way? Does it change what you can do in films? Can you still do things that you were able to? Like, I think of, I'm a very big David Lean fan, and you can't blow up trains anymore.
Oh, I have a good answer for this one. Okay.
You have to blow up a CG train, but you can't blow up a real
Neil
train.
wants to know how you blow up trains, Tilly. This is what
exactly. Can I blow up trains in the current?
Neil would like to blow up several trains, please, but not you.
Okay, well, we have 2 things we can do here. Firstly, virtual production is coming on apace, CGI and virtual production spaces. So that's a good one to watch. We made some choices creatively on productions I've worked on where we've chosen to film on green screen and then use CGI to put those effects on afterwards. But of course, everybody loves proper explosions. My partner is a senior special effects technician, so I have these conversations all the time. Right? So traditionally, to make a big explosion, you would burn diesel. Diesel is the one that gives you all the black smoke as well and the extended flame. But I was just last week, he's on a production in London at the moment. They've been testing a new technique, which I believe came out of the Australian special effects industry. And so there are different methods you can do there. And just to give you one example, this is an entirely fossil-free way of making an explosion. You can use a gunpowder charge, small gunpowder charge, and then you set fire to essentially wood dust, very, very fine wood dust. And just that small charge creates a very big looking explosion as all of the dust ignites all at once. But you're not using fossil fuels. So there are possibilities of finding different ways of doing things. We don't have to assume that just because we've done something for 40 years means it's the right way to do it.
Well, absolutely. Neil, are you taking notes?
I am. This is great. Okay, it's dust. So one thing you hadn't mentioned much at all, though, you just did now, but is fossil fuel and emissions. So there's sort of that recycling and the waste and stuff that seems like something really practical that you can get a handle on. But what about kind of really the most important thing, getting those emissions down to zero?
Yeah, so the 2 big parts of the footprint on every production, I would say, is at least 50% transport emissions. And then the next biggest chunk would be energy. So that's both energy from buildings and energy in creating power on location. So to take transport, first of all, obviously the switches we're looking at doing are reducing transport where possible. So that's where things like virtual production or using green screen in studio to minimize that need to shoot on location comes in. But also thinking carefully about the type of transport we're using. So again, when I talk about the challenges of infrastructure in Wales, we don't have a way of hiring vehicles as yet, big electric vehicles for unit base, for example. We don't have a particularly robust charging network in mid Wales. So things like that make it harder to make that rapid switch to electric. Whereas if you're filming in a big city like London, again, you've got much more infrastructure and a good network of suppliers that can make those switches perhaps easier. So we do a lot of careful planning around transport. We try and pool transport. There are things that you can do, but it's still always, at the moment, at least 50% of a production's footprint. So we're looking at incorporating electric and hybrid, as I say. With energy use, it's more looking at incorporating battery technology. Now, batteries get a lot of bad press around things like the potential for fires, and they can be quite big and bulky. And then, of course, you've got debates around the ethics in the supply chain, the mining of raw materials. So they're not a perfect solution. I have to say, though, the Guardian newspaper has recently done some excellent research pieces on all the well-publicized criticisms of electric technologies. So if you are interested in digging more into this, I would say just do a bit of Googling on the Guardian website. And they tackle a lot of these criticisms head on. So what we're doing at the moment, there is a cost factor in hiring in electric batteries and so on. And at the moment, I'm working with no dedicated environmental budget. So we incorporate small batteries at the moment with our power planning. So for example, there's one called an EcoFlow Delta, which is a small battery unit, but that powered a whole toilet and shower block on our unit base on the last location that we're at. And you can also use it, for example, to power DIT, digital imaging, just by the side of set there. If you need it to be silent and emission-free, a small battery unit can be ideal. We're also fortunate in Wales in that many of our studios are running on 100% renewable energy. So that means for when we're filming on stage spaces there and using office spaces, all of that energy, when we put the data into the Albert carbon calculator, it counts as zero emissions because it's on a 100% renewable tariff. So that's, again, a really good way to get our impact down there, is by finding these spaces that run on 100% green energy. And that also applies to any accommodation that we're booking. So I have a big spreadsheet of all accommodation providers in the regions where we're working, which are confirmed as running on green energy. And we prioritize booking those. So again, that's just an indicator, again, of our impact and influence on our supply chain. Just to give you one example, in Cardiff, we have a big load of apartments that are regularly booked by productions. They're called Capital Apartments. And when we booked them 2 years ago for a lot of our Havoc accommodation, they were not running on green energy. However, now they've switched all their apartments to 100% renewable. So if we were to book them again, that would go into our carbon calculations as zero emissions. And again, with post-production spaces, the company that we use are confirmed as running on 100% green energy. So again, we're making energy savings there. So it's about conscious decision-making along your supply chain to source these greener options. And again, it's also about pushing for dedicated sustainability budgets so that people like me and my production team can actually say, okay, that battery generator is more expensive to hire, but we're going to put this money into that and we'll have some cost savings because we're not burning fuel.
Is this something is this the Power BI that you referred to when you sent over that you're doing quite in-depth data analysis across a whole range of things about your carbon footprint impact? Is this Power BI? Is this what is, and if so, could you explain a bit more about that?
Yeah, so this what I'm talking about at the moment isn't directly related to Power BI, but I can tell you how we've used it.
I'm just curious as what Power BI is as well.
Okay, so I'm not particularly techie myself, but I do know people who are. So we were fortunate after making Havoc that we won Welsh Government funding to run an extended research and development project called Maximising Havoc. And we were able then to spend 6 months looking at our carbon footprint data And I'll tell you about the Power BI aspect of that in a second. But we also were able to take all of our collective learnings from sustainable production on Havoc. And I wrote a very, very long document. It's about 50,000 words long. And we have a shareable slide deck as well of all of our work on that. So it was a case of wanting to share everything we'd learned on that production with other people in the industry so that they could. Again, it's about just getting everybody up to speed on all of this.
And where is that available? Can people access that?
The slide deck, you would just speak to Seven Screen, and we could do a Zoom to go through it. The actual 50,000 word document is Seven Screens, so they just keep that. For their own reference, but this slide deck is a disseminated version of it. Nobody wants to wade through 50,000 words, I can guarantee that, but I just needed to get it all out of my head and down. And it's also quite visual. But the Power BI, this is where data gets really exciting, right? So people, when they do the Albert certification process, they have to collect all the data for a carbon footprint, accounting for everything bought or paid for by the production. Now, often that's done to the minimum, not the maximum. And so you end up with kind of skeletal footprints that aren't particularly thorough. Whereas I guess mine tend to be more the other way, where I try and account for everything as far as I can. So then what we were able to do on the research and development project, because we had this additional spend to cover my time and also the time of a Power BI data analyst, we were able to take some time to build interactive platforms where we could interrogate our data, and we could also run hypothetical scenarios through it. So just to give you one example, we took all of our meal data. So with the carbon calculator, you have to account for every single meal you serve. That includes per diems. So it meant tracking daily meals served and what those meals were. So you need to know, chicken, lamb, beef, pork, fish, veggie, vegan. All that is the granular level that you have to put this information into the carbon calculator. So the Power BI platform took all of our meal data across days of shoot and ran an analysis of the carbon generated by that. So we had a carbon tracker running through days of shoot. And at the top, you could see exactly how many kilos, and you can then play with the data. So you could say, okay, well, how many of those kilos were from beef, or how many were from veggie or vegan? Yeah. And then you can also play with the data by saying, okay, well, let's say all those people who chose beef and pork, let's take their meals away and switch them for veggie and vegan. What does that do to our carbon impact? And it will give you a per kilogram figure and readjust everything accordingly. So we did the same with energy and transport and accommodation. We just had those 4 key areas where we looked at running hypotheticals into the data. And what that gives me and our producers here at Seven Screen is an awareness of the power of their decision making in these areas, and the fact that they can see very visually how that impacts on the carbon footprint and consequently on the environment.
Are you able to does that help you work with like carbon budgets? Like you have a budget of like, this is how much carbon we're going to spend for this, and then be able to sort of mess around with the numbers there? Or are you doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the way I'm not doing that yet, but what I would say I'm aware of is our UK government legislated carbon goals and our Welsh government goals, which are both aiming for net zero carbon by 2050. And in the Welsh government's case, also net zero waste by 2050. So what that means for our industry, for the creative industries, is that we need to halve our carbon emissions by 2030. That's only 6 years away. It's a really tight time frame. We need to halve them again by 2040 to be on target for net zero by 2050. So for me, my imperative on production is to, with every decision we're making about whether we're hiring in or whether we're recycling or whether we're switching to HVO, which is an alternative biofuel, hydrotreated vegetable oil, that can be a great alternative for diesel. It's not perfect, but it's way better than burning fossil fuels for generators. So by making these switches, I'm constantly conscious of this need to get our carbon emissions as low as we can. And all the way through, I'm tracking our carbon footprint, and I can see very exactly how many emissions are being generated.
Just following on from that, though, so when you start this process, say on Havoc, you're just purely in monitoring mode, or do you have some sense of on a daily or weekly basis what your targets for catering should be, your targets, what you're trying to aim for transport? I mean, if you're starting somewhere, you possibly may have no idea what.
It's something like Havoc is like working on shifting sands. So
yeah, I'm sure.
Things change week to week, and you have to just go with it. All I can do at the time during shoot is collect the data. A lot of the actual analysis goes on at the end. So day to day on shoot, I'm barely in front of my laptop. I'm literally running around, talking to people, talking to different departments, sorting recycling, delivering donations. I'm literally at running pace. So a lot of the actual really thorough forensic data analysis happens afterwards. And also a lot of it I don't have access to until after we finish filming. So a lot of the expense charge cards and things I don't get until the accounts team have reconciled all of those. But we still need to get that data from them because those are still things that the production is paying for. So it's still
and I presume this is a process that all of this data on that one production and it's being replicated on other productions. It's all going to essentially it's going to coalesce and then that's going to lead towards a sort of an ideal target. I know the overall targets is to reduce the thing, but on a production similar to Havoc, I suppose in future you'd have a better idea of what you need to be aiming at in these different areas each day, week. Would that be?
Well, again, this is the benefit of having accurate footprints, is it gives you really good benchmarks. Again, productions vary in scale. So, a TV series is going to maybe look different from an American big budget feature. So, but you certainly start to get a feel for where those impact areas are and what that looks like. For me, it's all about the action as well as the data. It's about the actions taken across all departments to move towards better ways of working. And so that, again, is where the conversations come in. It's almost like the power of shifting mindsets and habits is as important as tracking and measuring the data. Because if we don't have practical actions and learnings happening among our crew, then, I can map all the data I like, but unless we're actually tangibly taking action to lower our impact, then I'm shouting into the wind. So a lot of what I do is about finding allies in all departments who get the urgency of this work and who want to get behind it. I mean, just to give you a tiny example, all of our unit drivers, the guys that sit there with the smart cars waiting to drive cast around at the beginning and end of the day, traditionally they used to sit there with their engines running on films and TV because they're either too hot or too cold or whatever. So, I mean, now we've just put a simple solution in place where there's always somewhere warm for them to go and sit, or cool if it's summer. And we have a very strict no idling policy. And now, if I'm on a production now, I would be very surprised to hear any engine just idling. Everyone is in the habit now of switching their engines off. So again, it's just these incremental habit shifts and making people aware of the power of their own individual actions.
I remember just a small Actorly anecdote. I was in a film a while back and they wanted to take me from the Randolph Hotel in Oxford, literally 2 minutes round the corner in a car. And I said, no, I'll walk, thanks. Really quite like the walk. Yeah. That was literally, and that was early noughties. I won't date myself.
There's still a lot. I mean, I'm talking, we have very far from solved all the problems, believe me. I'm still looking up at Everest in terms of what needs solving. But what gives me hope is what we've achieved so far in terms of building good green habits across all departments, crew engagement, lots of people really interested and proud of what we're doing. And again, in Wales, this feeling that we're all in it together from Welsh government level right down. There's it does feel truly collaborative in trying to find these solutions. But I'm not going to be able to sit here and say we're perfect and we're very far from perfect. Long way to go. But what we need, as I always say, is dedicated, trained sustainability teams and budgets to pay for them and to pay for things like greener fuels, battery and hybrid technology, virtual production, all of that kind of thing comes to cost, and we need budgets to pay for that.
So, it sounds like as well that, you've got, with the industry, it's a bunch of people from all over the place coming together in a production, and then they go off to some other place. And it sounds like there's this real opportunity for, what they get on one of your sets, they take off to other sets, that you kind of this pollination that can kind of go on. How do you, I guess, first of all, how would you recommend somebody start if they want to be doing what you're doing? And what kind of training is there, and how can we get more people up to speed?
Yeah, great question. So at the moment, I've trained people sort of just as I've needed assistance. I've people, young kids, really just school leavers come in and work with me. And they've since gone on within the industry and kept the mindset of that way of working. But what we really need is formalized training. So as part of the Wales Green New Deal report, training is very much one of the short-term recommendations for that. So I'm currently in the middle of writing a training program, trying to get, again, wrestling everything out of my head, because I think we do it slightly differently in Wales to maybe the way that other sustainability coordinators work. I think some people, and I don't know because I've only ever worked the way I do it, but I think often it's a top-down thing where you're working with the senior production team and you're making decisions at the top, whereas I'm much more on the ground working with crew, getting these sort of supply chain shifts and crew mindset shifts. And so it's more of a collective approach, I guess. And that's just because that's the way I work. I'm all about empowering people and getting them motivated to do this stuff, because I think otherwise there's a risk of it getting stuck in the production office and nobody on the ground really knows what's going on. You might have a battery Jenny, you might be using HVO, but if you're not having conversations around those choices, you're losing those learning opportunities and for your crew to get on board with the work. So
and they're not responsible for it. Somebody else's responsibility. It's got nothing to do with us,
Exactly right. So they're not taking agency themselves. So as far as training, I'm working with Media Cymru. Seven Screen and Media Cymru are in the early stages of developing a training, which is supported by hopefully other industry stakeholders as well, because everybody can see the value of needing bespoke training. The other reason we make it bespoke to Wales is because our training is informed by Welsh Government policy. And in Wales, we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act of 2015, which enshrines the rights of future generations in law. So we have a Future Generations Commissioner that scrutinises every piece of Welsh Government legislation through the lens of those future generations and speaks on their behalf. Now, that is quite bold legislation on a global scale. So I'm super proud of working in Wales under that sort of broader umbrella, and also those really clear net zero carbon and waste goals and the move towards circular economy that's going on in Wales. I think we're just a really proactive nation in that regard. So what that does is give my work broader context, and I think more leverage. So we'll train people up within that Welsh context.
Well, just going back to the Albert Sustainable Production Forum recently, it struck me very strongly that you had, we had the opening address from the government minister or there, and it did strike me that that it's. It's a political decision as well, isn't it? And there's some political will behind it. It's amazing how many things can be, accelerated or moved forward. So if I understand you right, so far though, Tilly, until you get your next magnum opus down about training and how we do it, another 50,000 words coming in. Yeah. I don't trivialize it, though. I think it's really important. You've just been up to now, though, relying on a sort of a sort of loosely arranged mentoring program. You've tried to bring people on, young people, to get them enthused. Is that right? It's been a sort of
I mean, I have to say one of them was quite nepotistic because it's my daughter who is a university graduate. So it was like, oh, here we go, nepotism in the industry again. But she then, having worked with me. She worked with me for some of Havoc, and then she actually led her own. She was a sustainability coordinator for a Hulu production called Black Cake that was made in Wales last year. So she kind of went to then run that job entirely on her own. She would be doing it now, but she's currently gone off backpacking. So so it's back down to there just being one of me at the moment.
Just one, yeah.
Just one. But I do get approached a lot by people really interested. And again, you talked earlier about the kind of ripple out effect of the work. Yeah. That when I generate this kind of momentum, hopefully, among the crew, I do still get emails from people I've worked with on jobs over the last 2 years. They've gone on to new jobs. They want to get in touch with me to ask about, different suppliers for recycling streams, or, could they have the poster about the food data, the meal data that I've shared with you. So they definitely take what they've learned onto these new productions. But sometimes I get emails that just say, oh my God, I'm so depressed. Everything's going into black bags here. So, we've got a really long way to go.
Right. But I guess if people keep going out to, they show up on the set and they're like, where's our sustainability coordinator? And they're like, well, we don't have one. That, if that question keeps getting asked, that might help push things along.
That's right.
So you're talking a bit about the BAFTA Albert's footprint and kind of measuring that footprint. And I'm surprised, actually. I mean, in the UK, people seem to know Albert pretty well, but outside of the UK, I'm surprised more people don't, even though it is, on the tail end of most UK programming. Can you maybe talk a bit about how that works in terms of, you kind of mentioned it before, but calculating that the footprints and the stuff that Albert needs, and then also that shift from, because Albert doesn't certify carbon neutral anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So has that changed anything as well?
Yeah, I can tell you about the changes there. So internationally, Albert is one of several carbon calculators that are available. So in America, you've got the Green Production Guide. They have a calculator that uses a system its acronyms, Peach, Pear, Plum. So a lot of US productions will go through that process, which is their Albert equivalent. However, the BAFTA Albert calculator is being used now by a lot of countries, including Finland, Australia, Canada on occasions. So you can, other countries can use the Albert calculator, and it's also very easy to tailor your calculations depending on where you're geographically located. So whether your production is based in a foreign country or whether you're just filming in a foreign country, when you put the data in, you can choose a drop-down menu and you can pick your location. So the Albert calculator will then adjust your carbon impact depending on where you're filming. So it's very adaptable in that sense. It's, as with anything, it's a work in progress. So it's constantly being refined and improved. I have some experience. I went over to the Tampere Film Festival in Finland last year to speak on some masterclass in sustainability panel that I was on. And so I did meet other people working in production there who were using the Albert calculator and so on. So I would say it's becoming more widely understood, but I think in the UK we are a little way ahead, is my understanding, of other nations. As far as the change of the end board, some of you may remember a few months ago, there was a lot of scrutiny, justifiably so, of offset schemes, and a lot of big businesses putting their carbon offset into schemes that were then found to be not very robust and in some sense maybe negatively impacting on the planet. And so then, of course, you risk accusations of greenwashing potentially. So Albert have decided that instead of making carbon neutral claims, it's more about sustainable production. It's more about the focus is on those choices you make as a production to lower your impact. It's not to say we're carbon neutral, because that's a little bit of a difficult thing to truly pin down. And then what happens with your carbon footprint in the UK, it is now mandatory to gather your data for your carbon footprint and to offset it. But the offset scheme that Albert recommends is provided by Ecology, who are a B Corp social enterprise. And so they have a really transparent scheme that they offer. It's gold standard, and you can see exactly how the money is spent on the ground. You can also choose an offset scheme of your choosing, as long as it's a good, high quality scheme, and you can prove to Albert exactly where that money's been spent. So, for example, in Wales, the Worldwide Fund for Nature are running a seagrass project just off the Welsh coast. So I think for a Welsh production, that could be a really nice thing to invest in. But from January, Albert are also bringing in the concept of insetting. Mm-hmm. Now, I can't really talk in detail about this because there's not a lot of information about it yet, but it's my understanding that you can either direct your carbon footprint into an offset scheme, gold standard, or you can redirect that money inwards into future productions to help facilitate green decision making.
So that could be like electric vehicles, or getting a sustainability coordinator on a production, or that money would actually go into the
that's right. So
green budget, I guess.
For an organization like a broadcaster, for example, that had a number of different projects running, they could then collate all of that carbon footprint spend into a budget that they then ring fence for, as you say, things like battery or hybrid power, or HVO fuel, or a fleet of EVs, or more coordinators on the ground. Exactly. So I don't think it would be the only portion of a sustainability budget that we need, but it would be a move towards it.
That's great. Just going back to difficulties of offsetting measure, there are lots of challenges ahead. The one that always comes back to me, and something that you mentioned when you sent us over some thoughts, is the whole Scope 3 measurement. Now, there's obviously a very laudable and quite right challenge about reducing Scope 3 emissions. It's always struck me as such a difficult thing to measure because it's sort of beyond control. I'd just be very interested to hear your thoughts on those and what progress we can make in general.
Well, Scope 3 emissions are, again, the majority of a carbon footprint of a production. So it's very much the area we need to focus on. Again, if I can refer you back to the idea of us as productions globally, think about our economic power. So globally, in terms of our economic influence as an industry, we spend more than $200 billion globally. So when we think about those Scope 3 supply chain emissions, if we can start to direct that huge economic spend towards green businesses, we can then really drive change along our supply chain. So that's one side of it, is not to underestimate our economic influence. So, to give you another example, when we made Havoc in South Wales for Netflix, that was estimated to bring around £25 million into the Welsh economy, just through basing that production here. So as a production, if we're then identifying and working with green suppliers as far as possible, and thinking consciously about where we're buying, how we're sourcing our resources, that again gives us huge purchasing power to shift and influence those supply chains. But the other challenge with Scope 3 is, how do we get that data? And again, when I am pulling together a carbon footprint, it's a massive challenge still, because often I'm sifting through receipts and I'm trying to pull out the exact dimensions of pieces of timber or weights of steel or whatever it happens to be. And then, of course, you've got to try and map any associated transport, whether it's couriers or taxis or, a delivery of a big load of timber to set or whatever. We are responsible in our Scope 3 for all of those associated impact areas. So it's a huge piece of data collection that goes on. And the way I have to think about it to stop me panicking is that I have to think, okay, have we paid for it? Because if we've paid for it as a production, then there's a paper trail. So what I do is I start with the purchase order and invoice system, which covers the bulk of the big payments and regular payments. And then I also track any spend detail that comes through, whether it's expense charge cards, petty cash claims, expenses that people submit with their invoices. So I go through all of that, and it takes a lot of time. And then I just try and be as comprehensive as I can in accounting for all areas of spend.
Thank you.
We're going to have to wind up here fairly soon, unfortunately.
It's been an hour already.
I know, I'm just, I feel like we're just starting to get into it.
I know, so much to talk about.
I guess it's maybe the sort of big picture stuff. What, what is you were talked about that Everest that you're having to climb, that you're looking up at. What is what's the biggest part of that Everest that you wish would go away to make the trip easier? What's the one thing that you're like, if you could just let's remove that Jenga block. Maybe that's a bad example because it falls, doesn't it? But remove that barrier. What would it be?
Oh, can I have 3 barriers?
I do 3 barriers.
3 barriers.
Okay, well, the first 2 I've already mentioned. Teams and budgets, imperative. We need really skilled, trained sustainability people with an understanding of climate science. Not just production people who want to do something different, but people who care passionately about the planet and bring that into the workplace with them and can then apply it to the challenges of the production industry. Budgets to enable us to make much better, stronger decisions in order to lower our carbon impact. The other one is more, I would love it if everybody in the production pyramid, from investor level down and all the way through the crew and along the supply chain, could share my sense of urgency, because it's a case of feel the fear and do it anyway. Like, we're all often rendered almost impotent by the fear of rapidly approaching climate change. And for some people, it's easier to turn away, or it's easier to focus on your work and not look outwards. But if we could get everybody engaged with a sense of urgency and to actually care about why this work is important, it would make it much more front and center, rather than it can be at times, depending on the production team you're working with, it can risk feeling a bit of a bolted on extra. Whereas I think it's just part of a future we're all moving towards, and we all need to get on board with this work.
Couldn't agree with that more. And that was very much the sort of, when we started the Flint, it was like we just got to do this thing and get the conversation moving. So I couldn't agree more, Tilly. So.
Yeah,
thank you so much for the conversation today, by the way. I've really enjoyed it. And as always, I'll get off the call and think, I should have said that. I can talk for hours about this stuff.
Well, we can have you back on again, and we'll be doing events and stuff as well in the coming year. So we hope we can see you again with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And we definitely want to do a piece on special effects and sustainability. So we need to talk to you.
Cool. That would be great. He'd be well up for that. And I have to say, his daughter, here's nepotism again. His daughter also worked with me as a sustainability assistant. And she, bless her, has set up recycling now in all the productions that she's gone on to as well. So
amazing.
Very much rippling out.
That's wonderful.
Well, great.
Well, look, thank you. Thanks so much for taking an hour out of your very busy day.
Pleasure. It's been great talking to you both.
Wonderful. Let's do it again. That'd be wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much.